What are my property taxes going to be? That's one of the most common questions we get from people like you thinking about buying a home in the state of Oregon, coming from outside of the state. And frankly, from what I've seen, there's a lot of people that already live here that don't fully understand property taxes. I'm going to break all of that down so you understand what your property taxes are going to look like in the state of Oregon, and I'm going to show you some of the areas that have higher and lower property taxes. All that starts now. Everyone, Seth Marchant with the Home Team Brokers here. Welcome back to the channel, or if you're new to this channel, living in Oregon, and you'd like to know more about what it's like to live in Oregon, including what your property taxes might be when you buy a home here, make sure and hit the subscribe button, tap the bell. That way you'll be notified every time we drop a new video, which is every week. And if you're somebody that's thinking about taking the next steps and moving here as licensed brokers in the state of Oregon, as much as we love making these videos, we'd love to help you move here even more. So you can call us, text us, email us, or you can click the link below in the description if you want to schedule a Zoom with us. All right, let's talk about some property taxes. So a lot of this hinges around a measure that was passed in 1997, Measure 50. There was another measure in 1990 as well, Measure 5, that comes into play. But let me give you some of the bullet points for what we're looking at here. So each district has a permanent property tax rate established by Measure 50. Assessed value growth is limited to 3% per year, with a few exceptions. We'll talk about those. Taxes on an individual property may not exceed Measure 5 limits, which is $5 for every $1,000 assessed of real market value for schools, and $10 for every $1,000 for non-schools, in other words, government. Voter-approved bonds may exceed Measure 5 limits, but other temporary levies may not. That's the few exceptions referenced above. And new property tax levies may only be approved at a general election with at least half of the registered voters eligible to vote. Oregon's property tax is local. All property taxes are collected locally to fund schools and governments in the area. State doesn't receive any property tax revenue. During the 90s, the Oregon property tax system was limited by Measures 5 and 50, and Measure 5 passed in November of 1990. It was successful in reducing property tax per capita and property tax as a percentage of personal income. And you can see here, just below in Figure 1, this was the reason why these measures were created. Believe it or not, property taxes in the 80s were a lot higher than they are now, as much as $33 for every $1,000 assessed. So what people were seeing is they were paying a greater percentage of their income relative to their property taxes, and that's what prompted these measures, Measure 5 and Measure 50. Before these measures, taxes were based on real market value. So Measure 50 established a property base by taking the real market value in 1995, 96 was the most recent data that they had when they passed this law in 97, and then they subtracted 10%. So that's where they started from. So from the beginning, they capped the increase at 3% per year from that number. Any additional costs relating to bond measures would be tacked on top of the fixed 3% annual increase. So that's that bullet point, that caveat at the very top. That's the only way you're paying more than 3% is through bond measures that are approved by voters. So all these new laws disconnected the assessed value of a home from its real market value, which in the past few years has been very helpful for people. Otherwise, people would have seen some massive tax bills. In Portland, home values have gone up for 43% on average over the past 2 years. So people's tax bills would have almost doubled in the past 2 years if you didn't have this measure. So each year, the real market value and the maximum assessed value for each property and tax is calculated, and that property is then taxed on the lesser of the two values, which is called the taxable assessed value. Now there is a caveat. The Oregon Constitution, because of this law, limits the growth of property value subject to taxation based on that limit on the property's maximum assessed value. So it can't increase beyond the 3% every year unless there are changes to the property, such as an addition, maybe you add a bedroom, or any sort of improvement. Maybe you remodel the bathrooms or the kitchen, or if you subdivide or partition the property. That is going to cause the value of the property to the assessed value of the property to go up. And here's the important part if you're thinking about buying a home in the state of Oregon, because this is the most common question that we get asked. The assessed value of the home doesn't reset when the home is sold and purchased by a new owner. So in other words, if you buy a home here for $1 million, because if that home was, if the property taxes on that home were assessed at $700,000 the previous year, you're not going to pay taxes on that $1 million. You're going to pay 3% above the previous year's assessed taxes. So only way that's going up is if you do some sort of addition that will cause the house to improve or the value to reset. Well, how will the county know? You are obligated, if you do some sort of improvement to the property, to report that to the county. If you don't report it to the county and they find out about it, they can go back up to 5 years and reassess and tax you for that reassessed value. Aside from that, filing a permit, which is going to be required for some of these things, is also going to trigger the county assessor's office. All right, let's take a look at an example. This is an example for Clackamas County. Portland is made up of 3 counties: Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah. Portland, the kind of Portland proper, downtown, the east side, that's in Multnomah County. Clackamas County is going to be kind of southeast of Portland, and Washington County is going to be more southwest. So you can see here we have last year and this year, and this is broken down by land and building. So last year we had a real market value of $876. This year just over $1 million, but you can see the assessed value right here. This is the number, this is the lower of the two numbers, so this is the number that you would pay taxes on. And if you look to this number right here, this year from last year, this number is almost exactly, should be exactly 3% higher than that previous year. So as realtors, it's pretty easy for us to calculate for you kind of what you would expect your taxes to be. We'll just find out what the taxes were for the previous year, and then we can just tack on an extra 3% and get a pretty rough idea of what you're going to be paying. Now, the only other thing, this is that right here, this is not subject to that 3% rule. So here's your education up here, here's your government right here. Bonds that people can vote on and can be levied are not subject to that 3% rule. And as you can see in this particular tax bill, you've got about a total of $8,300 or so. You've got about $2,300 in bonds. So that's about over 25% of the total. So those bonds, this is really going to vary depending on where you're at and how the people vote, how much additional tax you might pay beyond that 3%. And of course, that's going to change from year to year, depending on how long the bond lasts. You also, in the state of Oregon, you can get a discount by paying in full. Now, for most people, if you have a mortgage, your lender is going to collect property taxes from you in your mortgage payment every month, and they're going to set that aside to pay on your behalf at the end of the year. So, and most of them should be paying early so that you get to take advantage of that discount. It's going to vary from lender to lender, so if you want to inquire about your lender and about that, feel free to do so. If otherwise, you will be paying a lump sum. 1/3 is due by November 15th. If you pay 2/3, you get 2% discount. If you pay the full amount, you get a 3% discount. If you only pay that third or the 2/3, the full amount is going to be due by May 15th of the following year. So just applying that 3% to the previous year's taxes is going to make it pretty easy. As you can see, there can be some bonds in there as well too. And we might have the ability to figure out kind of what some of those are for you. Again, you can just get with us if you have questions about a particular property. Don't expect this to change anytime soon. There's a little bit of controversy right now. If you're searching this, maybe looking online, maybe looking up Measure 50, there has been a little bit of controversy. I think recently there's been a few articles. Maybe you'll find an article from a local newspaper, the Oregonian. Portland has had some neighborhoods, particularly on the east side, that have really become more popular in the past decade or so, and drawn a lot of people from like the city over to the east side, known as gentrification. And so consequently, real estate markets in some neighborhoods specifically throughout East Portland have really shot up a lot. some not so much. And so, in other words, you could actually find a home, and this is pretty rare in my experience, but it is possible to find two homes that are very similar, but one home has gone up significantly in value over the past decade or so. The other home has not, and the taxes are going to be very, very similar. Could be the same. You can even find some, in my experience, in rare instances where a home might actually pay lower taxes than another home that's similar that's actually worth less. And I think that's where it kind of gets complicated sometimes for people trying to figure out what the property taxes are, and what sometimes when they do some digging themselves, why they find so much variation in these numbers. If you're not familiar with the law and how this works, you might be kind of scratching your head looking up property taxes online on particular properties, wondering why one is so high and the other isn't. So in other words, the homes that have had the most growth in real market value, that have only been paying on assessed value, like we all have benefited the most from this measure. And overall, this is good for Oregonians to live in a desirable part of the country where more people are moving to rather than leaving, and home values are going up. If home values weren't going up, your assessed value is going to continue to rise at 3% every year. So it would be possible for, if your home value actually goes down, you're still going to pay more taxes the next year. That usually doesn't make most people happy. So with our current law, it's definitely good that home values are going up rather than down. But this kind of divergence in how much people are paying has, prompted some people, to call this out and complain. There's been a few articles written about it, like I mentioned. This one right here, Measure 50, Winners and Losers. Oregon homeowners used to pay taxes based on their property's worth. The connection ended in 1997 when voters limited how much property values could grow. Didn't limit how much they could grow, but limited how much they could be taxed on the assessed value. Homeowners in slow growth neighborhoods now routinely pay higher taxes than people with homes of greater value in gentrified areas. I haven't really seen that. There isn't any data in this article or in any related articles to kind of back that up, but it is possible for that to happen. And certainly, if that's happening, that's, would be a reason for people to complain. So we wondered what would happen if tax benefits of 97's Measure 50 were redistributed based on market value. The map reveals that 57% of homeowners would pay less under such a system, and only 43% are better off keeping the current system. Now this line right here, kind of know everybody is paying less taxes than before these laws. This line is really only kind of true, and actually if you click this link right here, it does get mentioned in this next article. It's really only true if right here, if the total amount collected stayed the same, but the taxes were once again tied to market values, which they aren't. If they were tied to market values, they would not stay the same. So that statement is basically only true if the total tax collected stayed the same. Now the government could predict or project what taxes might be. They could assign a number, and then they could work backwards from that number, and they could determine what percentage everybody would have to pay based on their real market value that would get them to that number, and then everybody would pay the same percentage in taxes. I don't know that the government wants to cap how much they're going to take in. And like I mentioned, the last couple of years, property values going up 43% in Oregon. You'd have a lot of people that frankly just probably couldn't even afford to pay property taxes if that were the case. Now, if you read this article, there's probably a few other things, at least one other thing to point out in here. Again, if you're not familiar with this area, if you're coming from out of state, which I know a lot of people are watching, it says right here, in Clackamas County, many Lake Oswego residents see major savings, while 58% of the county's homeowners pay more than their share based on home values. Now, based on how I just explained it, that's the point that the Oregonian is trying to make. It does seem a little bit unfair that we're all not essentially paying an effective tax rate that's the same. But don't mislead you. Don't let this mislead you. If you're thinking about moving here and you're not familiar with the area, Lake Oswego is the most expensive real estate in Clackamas County. So you're not going to save any money if you're just skimming this article. You're not going to save any money if you move to Lake Oswego. Lake Oswego, maybe say compared to another town in Clackamas County like Milwaukee, which is right across the river, home values in Lake Oswego are probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 times as much what home values are in Milwaukee, but people in Lake Oswego might only be paying twice as much taxes, or something to that effect. So people in Lake Oswego are paying way more taxes than everybody else, but the effective tax rate proportionally isn't the same as everyone else. Again, that's kind of the argument that Oregonian is trying to make. So when you're looking this up online, just want to make sure that you understand this. And by the way, for any Oregon lawmakers that are listening to this, when we get phone calls from people, a lot of people come from out of state, like from California, that are watching these videos, when we explain how the taxes work, they tend to assume that they're going to pay taxes on the price of the home, the market value of the home. So if they buy $1 million home, they think that they're probably typically going to pay $1 million. They're going to pay taxes on that $1 million regardless of what the previous owner was paying. Again, it does not reset when the home is sold. So that's always good news for people. And if it weren't the case, it might be prohibitive for some people to move here. Now, you don't need to know this, but if you're wondering if the taxes exceed either category, the limit for the property, the taxes are then reduced or compressed until that limit is reached. Local additional taxes are reduced first. If the local tax is reduced to 0 and the limit still hasn't been reached, then other taxes in the category are proportionately reduced. And for you people looking it up online, here's the effective average tax rate. So people are paying about 1%. And again, it's going to be 1% on that assessed. So if we go back here, you're paying 1% of, say, in this case, $541 instead of that $876. And as you can see, Multnomah County, Washington County, and Clackamas County, making up the Tri-County area, are right all about the same, very close. So there hasn't really been any talks of taxes changing too much from legislators here in Oregon, so you can probably expect that this will be the case in years to come. As of this past summer, Oregon's property tax ranks 23rd highest in the country. Back in the 80s, it was in the top 10. We also have no sales tax. We do have higher income tax. Not as high as California, of course, but our income tax does rate higher compared to the rest of the country. And in this graphic, you can see that around the Portland metro area, you kind of rank around average. The lowest is Wheeler up here. You also have Curry County down in the bottom left-hand corner. That is where Brookings is. It's one of the top retirement spots for not only people in Oregon, a lot of people in California also moving to Brookings. I think their effective tax rate is going to be somewhere like $6.70 per every $1,000. So they're pretty low down there in the southwest, a little bit higher down there in the southeast in Harney and Malheur County. If you have more questions about property taxes, if there's a property that you're interested in the state of Oregon and you'd like to know what the property taxes are, what they're going to be, you can call us, text us, email us. As I mentioned, you can always click the link below in the description below if you want to jump into our calendar and schedule a Zoom call with us. And if this video helped you, give us a like. Feel free to leave a comment if you have a question that you want to put in the comment section. And if you want to see more videos about what it's like to live in Oregon, and it's some videos like this, what the process is going to be and what you're going to be looking at as far as buying a home in Oregon, make sure and hit the subscribe button and tap the bell. That way you'll be notified every week when we drop a new video. And just feel free to reach out to us anytime, whether it's calling, texting, or emailing. We'll be here for you when you move to Oregon. Take care, everyone.